Good evening. Could everybody take a seat, please? Thank you very much. I understand we have a little competition over at the library. There's a meeting with a group called I Grew Up in Newport before it was the OC. It had a website that starts with each one of those letters. Well, a little aside, my kid's sister went to school with Gordy Grundy, who started that organization. This was quite a different town back when we were kids, but anyway. I am Deborah Allen. I am the Vice President of Speak Up Newport, and I welcome you all here. I see a few VIPs in the audience that I'll acknowledge. We have our former Mayor and City Council member, Diane Dixon. We have former Mayor Ed Selich. He's here somewhere. Parks Commissioner Marie Marston. Harbor Commissioner Paul Blank. Where is he? Oh, John, hi. Former Mayor John Cox, of course. Citizen of the Year, Seymour Beek. Is there anybody else who thinks they're important that I ought to introduce? Okay. Without further ado, we have a wonderful program for you tonight. It is about drones, and I have a very quick story. I was a teenager in Newport Beach, lived on the peninsula, when the City of Newport Beach got its first helicopter. And as a teenager, we weren't entirely sure what we thought about the fact that all of a sudden they were going to be able to see what we were doing from the sky, not just from the roads. So I think the concept of drones is one that's very near and dear to my heart. As an adult, I'm very glad we have such things now, but I'm not sure all the 18-year-olds think so. Without any further ado, I will introduce Deputy Chief Brower, who is a Deputy Police Chief in Newport Beach and also a member of our Board of Directors, and he will introduce the speakers for tonight. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Deborah. I really appreciate that introduction. And just so you guys know, I know some of you came and our plan initially was to have that drone flying in here, so when you came in, it was gonna, be buzzing around. But I don't know all the technical stuff, and I'll leave it up to the professionals here, but I guess there's some magnetic interference in here, and they tried it, and we would have something akin to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre if we tried to do it. So we thought that might be a bad way to start the evening with the drone taking somebody out. So we decided we'll leave it there, and you can see how the camera works. This presentation hopefully is going to answer some questions for you. At the end, we'll definitely have a question and answer period, because I know some people will have a few things that will raise a question in your mind, or you came here tonight with a question that if they don't answer it during their presentation, they will definitely be able to answer it at the end of the program. For the City Council members, they've seen, Damon has already gone and given a presentation to the City Council about drones. This one's a little bit tweaked different for this group, so there'll be some new stuff on there that they haven't seen yet, so we're excited about that. I want to introduce the two that are going to be speaking tonight. First off, we have Lieutenant Damon Pizarros. He's our Support Services Division Commander. He's been at the Newport Beach Police Department for quite some time. He's a 23-year veteran. He started off at the Los Angeles Police Department and came to Newport how many years ago? 20 years ago. Same as I did. I started at the Los Angeles Police Department, and Damon and I have been here for quite some time. So Damon is a very experienced person, and he's one of our drone experts, along with Tom Enchef. He's our police IT coordinator. He's also currently assigned to Support Services Division, and he's been with the police department for 15 years. And Tom is also a licensed Part 107 small UAS pilot and a private pilot. I don't know what all those things mean, so I'm sure he's going to explain that. But Tom is very well known around the department for having all the answers that we need for this, and he flies, and he's a pilot, so that's exciting. So hopefully this is going to be exciting and interesting for you guys. And please, at the end, if you have any questions, if there's something that don't think it's going to be a dumb question, because there's no such thing as one. These guys have heard them all, and I hope you can stump them at the end of the evening, because if you can stump them, I'll be happy about that. So. And with that, I just want to have Lieutenant Pizarros come up, and he will continue with the program. So thank you all.
Jeff's quite a bit taller than me. I've got to adjust the mic here. I have more hair, though, so we're all good.
Careful.
Thank you for having me tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. We are here for a drone presentation, and I look out in the audience, and I see some that were at council. This might be the second time you've heard a lot of this information. We have changed it up a little for the presentation tonight. It's going to be a little more interactive tonight, too. So we're going to start off with, I'm going to bring Tom Inchef up here in a minute, and we're going to talk about the drone. We're actually going to talk about how the drone operates, and Tom's going to give you an overview of that. Tom, as Chief Brower stated, is a small UAS pilot. He's actually certified to fly drones. I know a lot of you are like, well, I didn't even know you had to be certified to fly a drone. You actually do. Tom is a card-carrying small UAS pilot. He actually has his card with him tonight. As far as flying, we did want to fly in the building tonight, but as we get through the presentation, you'll understand some of the limitations we have with the law about flying in the building and about flying outside the building. The interesting thing about flying in the building tonight is it's actually legal, because this is not controlled airspace. We're inside a building. So it would be legal for us to fly inside the building. The minute I step outside and I try to take off, we are in controlled airspace, and that changes the whole scenario on some of the laws regarding the drone. So I'm going to bring Tom, actually I'll bring Tom up here in just one more minute. I want to say during the presentation, if a question grabs you, please feel free to just raise your hand. This is going to be interactive. We're not going to be very formal with this, so feel free to ask the question during the presentation if you have one. We'll stop and we'll answer it, especially if it's something that you just really want to ask us and you may forget as we move through the presentation. Okay, and then after we introduce the drone and we get Tom up here, we'll have a short PowerPoint, and then we have a couple videos at the end of the PowerPoint that nobody's actually seen before. It was actually one of our training days, a SWAT training day, where we used the drone to test some of the capabilities for law enforcement purposes. So that should be interesting for you to see what it can do and some of the capabilities. The other caveat I have before we get started is the Newport Beach Police Department doesn't have an official drone program. So I had to put out there, we are still testing. We don't have an official drone program at this point. And at the end, if you have some questions regarding that, I'll answer those too. So without further ado, I'll bring up Tom Inchef, and we'll talk a little bit about the drone.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having us. I'm going to speak on kind of the technical aspects of the equipment that you see here. Who here has any experience flying a drone? Has anybody tried it out? Okay, great. That's good to know. That is probably the part that I want to touch on the most with this. Is part of the reason we're here tonight is that there has been an explosion in this technology over the past 2 to 3 years. And really what we're seeing is that the ease of use and the ease of being able to fly has really reduced the barrier to having most people have the ability to make use of this technology. This drone here is on the mid to lower scale of what would be considered a hobbyist small unmanned aircraft system. And the real benefit that we see with these is twofold. One, they have internal guidance systems that utilize GPS. A lot of what people normally think of flying, if you've flown an aircraft or you've flown a model aircraft, is that you're constantly making adjustments and you're telling the aircraft what to do. With a quadcopter such as this, and this is really what we're going to focus on tonight, is this type of technology. This is the most prevalent type of drone we see out there. The drone is actually doing the flying. You're making suggestions to it. So if I tell it I want it to go left, it'll make the decision on what to do to go left. Vice versa, up, down, right, and left. So it makes it very easy for normal consumers to pick up this hobby, and it gives them the ability to then go fly and take pictures. That's the other reason we're here tonight, is that the camera technology that is incorporated into these systems is extremely good. What would be considered broadcast quality video is now basically the standard image sensor that you'll see in these systems. The image that we're pushing right here is actually coming from this controller, from the drone to the controller into the video system here. This is actually a very low resolution image for the purposes of broadcast. At the end of the presentation, you'll see the video and it will run at the full high definition, and you can see why people want to use these. It has the ability to shoot good video from a raised platform, and that's something that a lot of people use for a lot of recreational purposes. Developers can use it for doing real estate jobs. There's a lot of really good benefits to this new piece of technology. The components of the drone are pretty simple. It's usually a tablet of some sort, a base station controller, and then the aircraft itself. And the aircraft has, like I said, we're focusing on quadcopters. We'll have 4 rotors, and it will have a gyro-stabilized gimbal. So as the lieutenant moves it around, you can see he can shake the drone around and move it up and down pretty aggressively. The camera itself will stay centered, and the camera itself will provide a stable image for the video. And that again is another benefit of this technology. The controls are very simple. There's up, down, right and left, forwards and backwards. And again, like I said, the drone is actually flying itself and you're making suggestions to it to fly. If we were to have flown it in this building, we wouldn't have GPS. And because of all the magnetic interference, because of all the metal, it's very difficult to fly when you don't have those assisted aids. Any questions?
Excuse us, we're going to move over to the PowerPoint. It'll take a second for him to load it up.
Yes, that's actually a very good question. There's a couple different brands. This aircraft is by a company called DJI, and it is the most prevalent version of the drone or small consumer grade UAS systems that are out there. In fact, they just opened what they're considering one of their flagship stores in Costa Mesa. And for the most part, they all operate the same way. This company is, if you see a quadcopter like this, it is primarily as a part of this company.
Oh, the question, and again, just for everybody in the room, the question was, do all of the drones out there basically use the same technology? I think Tom did a good job of explaining that. Thanks. Okay, so we'll start with the PowerPoint and small unmanned aircraft systems. The items for discussion. And do we have the notes up here? So the items for discussion, what are small unmanned aircraft systems or drones? I think we just answered that and we talked about it. What is the difference between recreational flight and commercial flight? What types of airspace does a drone pilot in Newport need to know about? What regulations does the state of California impose on drone flight? And then how are other cities addressing this issue? And then we'll have a questions and comment period at the end. But again, as I stated before, feel free to interrupt me if you have a question.
Does the federal government want to really inside?
Yes. Well, the FAA controls the airspace, so the short answer is yes. What are drones? Per the Federal Aviation Administration, a small UAS or drone is an unmanned aircraft system with the equipment necessary for the safe and efficient operation of that aircraft. An unmanned aircraft is a component of a UAS. It is defined by statute as an aircraft that is operated with the possibility of direct human intervention from within or on the aircraft. What are the two ways that we can fly drones? Well, there are really only two ways. One is commercially. Tom mentioned that already, and then recreationally, and that is basically flying for fun. And commercially would be flying for work. Flying as a recreational pilot. The FAA defines recreational flight, and I won't read the whole definition here. We'll skip over that. You can read it up on the screen. But recreational flight is just that. It's flying for recreation. It's flying for a hobby. And then here are the requirements for recreational flying. The aircraft is flown strictly for a hobby or recreational use. The aircraft is operated in accordance with a community-based set of safety guidelines and within the programming of a nationwide community-based organization. The aircraft is limited to not more than 55 pounds unless otherwise certified through design, construction, inspection, flight test, and operational safety program administered by the community-based organization. And the aircraft is operated in a manner that does not interfere with and gives way to any manned aircraft. And then when flown within 5 miles, and number 5 is important, you'll hear this throughout our presentation. When flown within 5 miles of an airport, the operator of the aircraft provides the airport operator and the airport air traffic control tower when an air traffic facility is located at the airport with prior notice of the operation. Basically, you'll see that the City of Newport Beach almost wholly resides within that 5-mile radius of John Wayne Airport, and therefore requires tower approval with any flight. That differs from a lot of the cities that are around here because we do fall within that controlled airspace of John Wayne Airport. Flying for work. Any drone flight where a pilot receives any form of compensation or for the furtherance of any organization is basically flying for work. The requirements for commercial flight, they're obviously different than the requirements for recreational flight. You must have a remote pilot airman certificate. I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, actually, Tom has his certificate. He probably has it in his wallet. And you know what, Tom, do you mind if we show him that? You must be 16 years old. The aircraft must weigh less than 55 pounds, must contact John Wayne Tower and receive approval, must fly during the day, and must not fly over non-participating parties. So if we were to fly outside, all of you would be a non-participating party. So legally, without a waiver from the FAA, we couldn't fly over non-participating parties. FAA rules and regulations. The methods for operating a small UAS or drone for commercial use in national airspace, there's really 3 ways that you can do this per the law. The first is Part 107, Part 333, and then a public certificate of authorization. And we'll talk about these as we move on. Federal airspace regulations. I'm going to bring actually, Tom, besides being a small UAS pilot, he's also has his private pilot's license. So he's very familiar with the airspace regulations and rules from the FAA. So I'm going to actually bring him up and turn this little segment over to him on airspace.
So this is really kind of the crux of why we want to give this presentation, because one thing that people don't understand is that, like the lieutenant said, flying in Newport Beach, we are wholly contained, for the most part, there's a couple few areas, wholly contained within what's called the Surface Class C airspace. So a good way to think of airspace is upside down wedding cake. And you have different radiuses of controlled airspace that start at the surface, and then you can have different tiers that go up to different altitudes. So the City of Newport Beach is in the most restrictive portion of that airspace, which is the surface component. And the levels of airspace, as you can see here, are descending in category of severity. Class B is actually the most restrictive, and that's an airport such as Los Angeles Airport, O'Hare Airport, very large hub terminal airports. Next is Class C. So even though John Wayne is considered a smaller airport, it has a very restricted amount of airspace around it, and because of that, the rules for small UAS flight are fairly restrictive. So this is an image of the Class C surface airspace around the City of Newport Beach, and you can see that other than just a few areas in Newport Coast, as well as a couple areas along the beach, everything is encompassed within that Class C airspace. Any questions about that? Okay.
We've gone Irish all over Newport Center, and taking measurements off buildings and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's ever complained about it.
Well, so it's a bit interesting, and are you flying it for?
Usually 500 feet.
That's okay.
So yes, typically we don't, because of all the drones, the proliferation of drones over the last couple of years, they're all over. And regulating them is not an easy task. And that's again where the technology has kind of surpassed the laws regarding it. But you know, I mean, you flew it, and I'm sure it was a safe operation. But per the law, you were required to notify the tower of that flight. at that time.
You know what it's used most often for in the beach communities? Surfers are checking the waves.
Yeah.
Back from their house, down the waves and then back.
Well, what's interesting, we'll talk about, Tom's going to mention that airspace again. If you see the little sliver of the peninsula there, and I think we have Councilwoman Dixon present. Yeah, so this is actually Councilwoman Dixon's, this is her area, and one of those areas that falls outside that 5-mile radius of airspace is right by the Newport Beach Pier when you talk about the waves. So in that little sliver there, it's actually legal to fly without notifying the
No,
tower.
we're not talking about flying from the pier, we're talking about flying from the homes down the
Oh,
water.
sure. Yeah, we see them all the time. They're up on the peninsula all the time.
So, and you're actually touching on two different types of flight. Recreational flight is surfers looking at the waves, and commercial flight is anything for the furtherance of a business. There are two very, very different sets of rules for both of those. This is the other location, which is Newport Coast, which is also outside of the Surface Class Charlie airspace. So this is another location where you are not required to contact the tower if you're flying recreationally. If you're flying at any time in this area for commercial flight, you do need to contact the tower. Now, one thing you'll notice is that these coastal routes, or there's areas along the coast that do not have restrictions because they're outside the Surface Class Charlie airspace. The only problem with that is even though it's legal to fly there, that's also areas that are known as what are called VFR corridors. So manned flight, banner towing, law enforcement helicopters, civil aviation or general aviation, they can all fly at low altitudes right off the coast, and it's perfectly legal. So if you were to fly in those areas, you really have to be very careful because those are locations where incidences involving small UAS and manned flight can occur.
I'm gonna try to, the question about the drones in Newport, I'm gonna kind of stop and talk about that for a minute. We do receive quite a few calls for operational drones being flown at Newport Beach from residents that are complaining about them, either flying over their house, flying by their windows, flying by the beach. We do receive complaints. We do send officers to those calls. You can imagine trying to find a pilot carrying this small. It's not an easy task for law enforcement. Matter of fact, it's almost impossible sometimes to find the pilot of the drone. But as we become educated with the laws and we pass that education on to our police officers, which we are currently doing, it's going to be easier for them to enforce some of the federal laws on the books for drones. And as we get through the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about more about what those laws are and some of the stuff that we have the power to do regarding drones. So the current state laws, crimes against the public health and safety, you'll see 402 here. And it basically says every person who goes to the scene of an emergency or stops at the scene of an emergency for the purpose of viewing the scene of the activities of police officers, firefighters, emergency medical personnel, or other military personnel coping with the emergency in the course of their duties during the time it is necessary for emergency vehicles for those personnel to be at the scene of the emergency. Basically what it's saying is if somebody's flying the drone over an emergency, they shouldn't be because it's interfering with the emergency operation. This is a current state law, and I'll give you a short story of actually when this was applicable, or when actually Tom and I were able to identify a drone pilot. If you were about a year ago, we had the mutual training drill between the Newport Beach Fire Department, the lifeguards, the Coast Guard, and the police department, and it was down at CDM Main Beach. During that operation, we had several drones flying over the operation, and it was preventing the Coast Guard from getting their helicopter into the scene because the drones were in the air and you could see them. Tom and I actually were able to locate the pilot of the drone, and we asked him politely to land the drones, and we explained the law to him, and he wasn't really well versed on this law. Once we explained it to him, he agreed to ground the drones and not fly for the remainder of the emergency operation that we had at the time. Interestingly enough, he had contacted John Wayne at Tower and received approval to fly that day. He just didn't know he was supposed to fly over, wasn't supposed to fly over the emergency training drill that we had that day. So we do find him every once in a while. We do contact him. That was one story where we actually were able to find him. He was actually right up on the bluff, and he had his whole operation set out. He had, what, three to five drones there. So, and he was actually a commercial pilot. If I recall, he was actually flying for profit. He sold his images, I believe, online and whatnot. The City of Newport Beach municipal codes. So we'll talk a little bit about the municipal code that we have on our books now, 5.46.010, and it reads, "No person shall use any property zoned or utilized for a residential use, public property, or public facility for the purpose of staging, shooting, making, capturing, taking, or recording of images for any commercial or business purpose without first applying for and receiving a permit from the city manager or film liaison." We talked a little bit about the camera on the drone, and if you think about it, if you're flying commercially and you're up there and you're taking pictures, technically you should have gone through the city for a filming permit. That would be applicable to anybody in the real estate market filming real estate for sale for the internet. They should be going through the city to acquire the permit before they fly, and then also abiding by all the FAA regulations when they fly. So some of the criminal laws applicable to drone operations. So we have Penal Code Section 632, that's eavesdropping, invasion of privacy. Penal Code Section 634, trespass or invasion of privacy. Penal Code Section 647, disorderly conduct, concealed recording, and Penal Code Section 646.9, stalking. And really what this is, and these penal codes were already on the books. They weren't designed for laws. They weren't designed for drones, but they were already on the books, and you can see with the camera, I mean, if you're flying and you're looking in somebody's window, where some of these might be applicable. I can say that as of now, I don't know anybody that's been prosecuted under any one of these laws, but I can certainly see a situation where that would be possible in the future. Local regulations, examples of how other cities are dealing with drones. We can talk a little bit about the City of Laguna Beach and the City of Irvine. Those are our two closest neighbors here. Laguna Beach has created and is in the process of enacting Municipal Code 7.80.010. And the municipal code is summed up in the following, in their ordinance. Basically, cannot be operated in a reckless manner which endangers life or property of another, cannot capture, record, or transmit any visual image or audio recording of any person or private property located in the city under circumstances in which the person has a reasonable expectation of privacy, including but not limited to inside a residence, private office, or inside a hotel room. Cannot operate a drone in a manner which harasses, stalks, annoys, disturbs, frightens, intimidates, injures, threatens, victimizes, or places mental distress upon another. Cannot operate a drone in the airspace over Heisler Park, and I'm not going to list all. Basically, it talks about almost all their beaches and parks that you can't operate a drone over. Cannot interfere with the operation of support or emergency services, just like we saw in the previous law. The City of Irvine requires any flights to conform with FAA regulations and requires any commercial operators to have a city business license. The city is also looking at creating an ordinance for regulating drones. Parts of Laguna and Irvine are outside that John Wayne Airport controlled airspace, and that was that red circle. I believe all of Laguna is outside of that John Wayne controlled airspace. There is a segment of Irvine that does fall within that 5-mile radius of John Wayne Airport and that controlled airspace. The FAA and the role of law enforcement. So law enforcement officials and first responders and others can provide invaluable assistance to the FAA and help deter unsafe UAS operations by taking the actions outlined below. So the question earlier, doesn't the federal government basically control drones? Well, the short answer is yes, they control the airspace. So the FAA technically is in charge of the airspace. But what we can do is we can basically 1 through 6, witness identification and interviews, identification of operators, viewing and recording the location of the event, identifying sensitive locations, events, or activities, notification, and evidence collection. And you'll notice 1 through 6 are really the way that we would handle almost any crime. That's really kind of the investigative guideline that we would actually deal with any crime. The difference being is once we've done 1 through 6, that information or that packet or investigation will be forwarded to the FAA. They would be the ones that would handle the actual fines or penalties involved with the illegal use of the drone. And I'll be honest with you, Tom, how many cases has the FAA actually prosecuted? So they prosecuted 2. So you can see that, yeah, they're not prosecuting a lot of drone cases as of now. Okay, so before I start, and actually, can I pause that?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You mentioned getting clearance from John Wayne Airport.
I got it.
How
I can actually speak to that. So if you're flying recreationally, in fact, we'll have a little segment at the end of this, the next video we'll show you. I live in controlled airspace also, and if I want to fly recreationally, I'll call the tower a few days ahead of before I want to fly and say, hi, this is my name, this is a phone number you can contact me at, this is where I want to fly and how high I want to fly and the time and the date. Just call them right on the telephone number. The phone number is available on our website. It's available on John Wayne's website. It's readily available. What will then happen is they will call you back and they will say you are approved, you're not approved, or they will then tell you any changes they need. So you're approved to fly, but you actually have to stay only 100, or you can only go up to 100 feet. You can't go to 200 feet. And at that point, then you're clear to go ahead and do your flight. So.
So what kind of time frame does it take for them to call you back?
It's usually about a 24-hour turnaround. It can be, I've had it be 48 hours. I've never not gotten a call back. You do have to plan way ahead. You unfortunately cannot fly off the cuff in controlled airspace, even for recreational flight. So, and a lot of people don't know that. What Lieutenant Strauss was saying about the FAA, they primarily focus on what's called administrative punishment. So fines, penalties. If you do have a license or you are operating in a commercial capacity, they will restrict your license and pull your ability to do that. So when it comes to a criminal side, then they'll work with a local agency or they'll work with a federal enforcement agency. Mm-hmm.
So we talked a little bit about the law and, kind of it's the wild, wild west as far as drones go in the law. If you follow some of the drone law, the City of Newton, if you're familiar with the City of Newton in Massachusetts, they recently, as of about 2 months ago, had one of their small UAS pilots challenge their city ordinance, and he won the case. And some of the big topics that came out of that case were registration. The city was requiring drone pilots to register their drones locally with the city, and they lost. The registration was revoked. They no longer have to register their drones with the city. And then some of the other ordinances of where you could fly, where you couldn't fly, they also lost. And the main reason is the preemption issue with the federal government, because the FAA is the controlling body of that airspace. So that was the preemption issue, and that's basically what happened in Newton, Massachusetts. And that was really the most recent case that's come about involving drone and drone ordinances with cities. Any questions on that? Okay, I'm going to move into the video presentation portion of this. And this was actually taken with this drone, just so you have a clear idea of what the capabilities are of the drone. One of the videos, I believe the first one is one of our SWAT training days. I'll talk through the video as we go, and you can see what some of the advantages of using a drone are. And then if you have any questions during that, feel free to ask, and we'll answer those. Anybody can, my geography experts, tell me where this is at? Where's Councilwoman Dixon? Good one. So as you look at this image, you can automatically see from the perspective of a police officer on the ground the advantage that we gain from obviously being in the air and being able to look at the surrounding area and being able to identify people on the ground and just that bird's eye perspective. And even for a helicopter hovering low, we almost can't get that image quality. I mean, we have a person obviously operating in a helicopter, but that information is usually being fed to us from the pilot, from the aircraft. In this case, we're looking at first-hand footage from the drone, and it's live. So this is actually the drone hovering by the windows of this building. And lots of times we want to see who's inside or what's inside, and you can see that we've also identified a person wearing that reflective vest right there. You can clearly see him in the window. And we're just going to let it roll for a while. You'll see some more people walk back and forth through the window. But you can obviously see the advantages of this in one of our SWAT operations, or for that matter, any of our police operations, because everything we do is gathering intelligence, and we want to know what's going on, obviously, before we enter a building, and we also want to know what kind of threat we're dealing with. Very good question. So her question was, do we have the ability to zoom in? We do. It's not actually through the camera. The camera doesn't have a zoom function, but what we do is you simply fly closer. So that would be your zoom.
But you couldn't expand it on the computer or anything like that. You couldn't expand the image once you had a computer in front of you?
We actually could. We
Oh.
can expand the image, and we can actually snapshot the image, and then we can actually blow the image up if we wanted to do that too. So yeah, we have the ability to do that. And we could snapshot any portion of this. And for instance, let's say the SWAT team wanted to know how many windows, or maybe what the interior looked like through the window, and we had an image of that. We could snapshot that, basically freeze the image, and then we could send that to the SWAT commander so they would have that layout of whatever room we were dealing with at the time. And you can see, and again, I'm looking at it on the computer. I have a little better image than is portrayed up on the screen, and you can actually see pretty clearly some of the bodies inside the windows. Okay, this was just a quick C&T operations. We have quite a few instances that involve stopped cars or cars that we have to deal with people inside the car. And the advantage of being able to hover in the front of a windshield and see what we're dealing with inside the car is another advantage of a drone. I mean, you can get pretty much right down in the window and look inside a vehicle that we would want to see in, and this would, we've had several instances where we've actually had some hostage type situations in cars. And then the last one here would be recreational flight. And Tom, this is actually Tom flying for his kid's birthday party. And I'll just cover. Tom actually did notify John Wayne Airport that he was flying. And so he did everything legally by the book, and he has his small UAS card. And that's the birthday party. And again, we talked about recreational flight and commercial flight. Well, obviously this is recreational flight. It's for fun, enjoyment. Okay, we've talked a little bit about airspace, regulations, privacy, and enforcement. We'll open it up to questions, and I mean, feel free to ask us anything. Drones is so expansive. The laws are, like I said, trying to catch up with the technology. If we can't answer the question, we'll get you the answer, but I believe between the two of us, we can probably answer anything you can throw at us. Yes, sir.
How many officers in the Newport Beach Police are trained and qualified to fly drones and conduct this activity?
0. I'd probably be the closest one at this point, but I don't even have my small UAS operational card. The only actually employee, not police officer, Tom's a civilian, but the only employee of the police department right now that is certified to fly the drone is actually Tom Inchef. Yes, sir.
Or every time you fly a drone?
Yes, we do.
Every time?
We've only flown a drone operationally once. So
You just showed me pictures of taking pictures down at the Balboa Yacht Club or something.
and we were
looking in windows and
we
everything.
were legal to fly.
So you called the John Wayne Airport?
Yes, we
first?
did.
Okay.
And the reason that being is every time you lift that drone off, there's a liability interest with the police department. If that thing crashes, for instance, and we haven't done everything by the book, obviously we're on the hook, and that's not a situation that we want to put the police department or the city of Newport Beach in. So we have to follow the regulations. We have no choice.
How much do these drones run, and can you get insurance on them? Depending, I guess it would depend on commercial versus recreational.
So yes, they range anywhere from, I think now the lowest level of actually the ones that have the GPS function are about $200 all the way up to hundreds of thousands of dollars, to be honest with you. It just depends on what you want to use it for and the technology behind it and some of its functions depending on cost. So yes, you can insure it. I'm not too familiar with insurance. Tom, do you?
Typically falls under general liability insurance.
So general liability?
You can get insurance through AOPA, which is a General Aviation Pilots Association, and they're now offering UAS insurance for commercial operators.
If you had a police situation where you wanted to use a drone, how long would it take you to set it up to actually use it?
It's a great question. If we had the drone, sorry about the feedback, if we had the drone at the operation to actually get it in the air, if we had it there, and the pilot there, minutes. The problem is the pilot there? Where is the pilot coming from? That can vary, just depending on that. But to get it in the air, if we have the equipment there with the pilot, is literally minutes, if not seconds, in some cases. Yes. And that would vary just depending on where that pilot was coming from. And the equipment is, this equipment, and again, we don't have a program. This is a test that we've been dealing with. But it would come from the police department. City of Newport Beach is relatively small. I mean, anywhere in the city, probably within 15 minutes to get the equipment there.
Would it be possible for the city to get a blanket permit from the FAA to conduct their operations without having to call in each time you want to fly a drone?
So that's a great question. So remember we talked about that certificate of authorization in the beginning? Yes, that is possible. And it's not the preferred method anymore. Part 107, which we mentioned in the first slide, is actually the preferred method of certifying the drone now, because Part 107 really is stating that you're going to abide by all those FAA regulations, and you're going to get the waivers for nighttime operations, for flying over non-participating parties. So Tom met all the requirements for Part 107, and that's what he actually obtained his small UAS pilot license under, is Part 107. The COA, or Certificate of Authorization, that would blanket, basically cover the city, but it's basically saying, in essence, that we're going to have our own program, and we're going to make sure we follow our rules, and we do everything safely. And I'll let Tom talk a little bit more about that. Get him, Mike.
We touched just generally on the two ways that you can fly commercially, and one is Part 333, and it's a legacy system that was put in place prior to really the prevalence of the small, less expensive UASs. The new system, which came out in August of 2016, August of 2016, is Part 107. And what it is specifically a set of rules tailored to small commercial UAS flight that puts together basic operating instructions for when you are not operating within controlled airspace. So the rules that we stated, 16 years of age, under 55 pounds, operating during daylight hours, operating within visual line of sight. The thing with Part 107 with the police department, that would be the bulk of how we would do our operations, with the caveat that we would need to get some waivers. One of the first waivers would be for controlled airspace. So the situation you brought up is that if we had a Part 107 waiver and an active program that we could show and document how we were going to operate, the FAA would then say, the City of Newport Beach Police Department is legal to fly whenever they need to for police operations within these parameters. And yes, at that point, we wouldn't have to call the tower every time. On an actual operational level, we would always contact the tower and advise them that, hey, we're going to be operating in this area. Please put out a notice to airmen for manned flight operations, drone activity in this area. And primarily that's going to affect helicopters and general aviation aircraft that are coming into land around John Wayne, especially if we're in one of the approach corridors for that airport. So.
And that certificate of authorization basically says that we as the city are certifying our drone program ourselves, and we know what we're doing.
Is there any thought in the department of going that route and doing that kind of applying for a certificate and having its own program and having people on the staff of the police department who know how to fly these things?
Not at this time. we are, as a police department, at the point where we're in a kind of a standby pattern, no pun intended with the standby pattern. We're trying to wait till some of the laws actually catch up with the technology. So when we do decide to implement a program, we do it correctly, we do it right, we abide by all the regulations and all of the laws. We have done all the research. We do have a pilot that meets those Part 107 requirements. So should we decide to move forward in the future, it's definitely an option. But we want to make sure as a police department that we, in essence, cross our T's and dot our I's.
And that's, on that same note, what do you see as the biggest issue with getting that done?
I don't actually think, sorry for the feedback. I don't actually think it's an issue so much of getting it done, because if we applied for, say, our Part 107 permit through the FAA right now, I believe we would be granted the permit. So it's more of the other concerns. With the police department, we differ a little from the fire department, from the marine department, in the fact that there's a lot of privacy concerns when we're flying a drone with the police department that, quite frankly, the fire department doesn't really face, or the marine department doesn't face. You know, their operational needs are completely different than the police department. So we run into that big, you know, big brother, eye in the sky privacy concern issue that some of the other departments wouldn't face. And that's why we're going to be ultra careful before we decide to implement a program. All right, Robin? No questions? All right, one more? We got a couple more?
You mentioned the Marine Department. Is the Marine Department using drones now?
Yes, I believe they are. I don't want to really speak to the Marine Department's operations, but again, there are some differences. Remember, if you're flying out over the ocean right now, you're actually outside of that controlled airspace, right? We talked about that. So number one is some of those restrictions go away because you're outside of that John Wayne controlled airspace. I believe they have used it for shark identification. Correct me if I'm wrong, Deputy Chief. Yes, they have used it for some shark identification. Most of that revolved around the junior lifeguards program. They would do some sweeps of the coastline visually with the drone. And I hope I'm accurate with that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm curious to know that people flying drones over their own property. And of course, in Newport, properties tend to be very small and limited. But I understand on ranch lands and in other large property situations, people routinely fly drones to get animals and other things. Is it always controlled airspace, even when it's over a person's property?
So this question came up. It's came up a couple times. So if you're flying over someone's property, the question usually is that private property? No, it's still airspace because no one can own, in essence, the air. So your property is your property on the ground, but the airspace is still controlled by the FAA even over that property. Now, as far as controlled airspace, that depends on whether it falls within that 5-mile radius of an airport like it does here. But, you know, say in the state of Texas, if you're out in the middle of nowhere on a ranch, you're not going to be within that controlled airspace. Therefore, those limitations of notifying the tower are not there. So that would be different than obviously what we deal with here within that controlled airspace. On behalf of the Newport Beach Police Department, Deputy Chief Brower and Tom Inchef, thank you for having us tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very informative, and I certainly learned a lot. And I think, but perhaps some of the people in the audience learned a great deal about what the regulations are and things they should be doing. Thank you. That ends this program. However, we are dark in December. Our next Speak Up Newport meeting is going to be Wednesday, January 10th. And you might find that very interesting because it's going to be on sea level rise. And if you live on the peninsula or on Balboa Island, or anywhere in the lowlands of the city, that's an issue that will be near and dear to your heart, and we have a wonderful program with people from UCI and some people from the city explaining how and when we can protect you against that and how we can't and what you might want to do to protect yourself. So please come back on Wednesday, January 10th at 5:15 for the social hour and 6 o'clock for the meeting. And of course, on February 2nd, we have the Speak Up Newport Mayor's Dinner. It will be at the Marriott Hotel, as it always is. And you're welcome to buy a ticket. You can go online to speakupnewport.com, and very shortly we're going to have tickets available and whole tables available. So please come and join us. Thank you very much. Good evening.